Good morning, and welcome to this Canmore Local Assessment Review Board hearing. I would like to remind everyone that the Assessment Review Board hearings are open to the public and that this hearing will be recorded and live streamed. A video recording will be our record for the hearing. We are here today to review the complaint and subsequent evidence filed for tax roll number 21859, which is the municipal address of 477 Stewart Creek Close in Canmore. I will start by introducing the panel and then ask the parties to introduce themselves. After that, I will explain the standard hearing procedure and ask for comments in that regard. My name is Dale Hildebrand, and I am the presiding officer appointed to this panel. The other panel members with me on my left is Ms. Michelle Ouellette, and on my right, Mr. William Vodden. Does anyone have any objection to the panel as constituted? None, thank you. I'm now going to have the parties introduce themselves, starting with the complainant. Would you please state the name for your record?
Yes, my name is Al.
I need you to come up, Al, thank you.
My name is Al Frederick. I'm the owner of 477 Stewart Creek Close.
Great, thank you very much, Al. And now for the respondent, would you please state for the record your name, organization, and your position with the municipality?
My name's Deanne Bannerman. I work for Benchmark Assessment Consultants, and I'm the assessor for the town of Canmore.
Thank you. The Local Assessment Review Board hearing standard practice is to firstly have the complainant present all of their evidence, followed by questions from the respondent and the panel. Next, the respondent presents their evidence, followed once again by questions from the complainant and then the panel. The complainant will have the opportunity for rebuttal. Finally, both parties will have an opportunity to present their final arguments and summarize their evidence for the panel, with the complainant presenting first. If anyone needs a break or if a problem comes up, please let the panel know and we will as soon as possible, and we can address those things. I'd also like to take this time to remind everyone to please turn off their mobile devices. Are there any questions regarding the procedure today, or is everyone satisfied with the process as I've laid it out? Great, thank you. Are there any preliminary issues? All right, seeing none. I see that both parties have exchanged disclosure evidence before the hearing. To save time, I propose that we mark all documents for the record now. That won't stop anyone from raising questions about admissibility later. If any questions arise, we can deal with them and strike material from the record later as necessary. Is everybody comfortable with this procedure? We can mark the evidence now. Is that okay? All right, thank you. If I could please ask the clerk to go through the evidence for this hearing and mark it for us.
Sure. So we'll start with the complainant disclosure evidence. So as they have been labeled for the purposes of the hearing, we have disclosure C1 is the complaint form, the original complaint form, and that is 1 page. We have disclosure C2, which is the labeled as April 12th email from the assessor, and that should be 2 pages. Then we have disclosure C3, residential ratepayer reports, and that is 3 pages. So you would have a report in the top left, it would say tax roll 21859, 21858, and then the other one is 21860. So that's your 3 pages for the residential ratepayer reports. And then disclosure C4 is the May 2022 email exchange, and that is 4 pages. And then disclosure C5 is a property photo, labeled photo taken July 26, 2021 or earlier. So that is just one page for that photo. Disclosure C6 is the sprinkler system invoice, and that's 8 pages, which includes an email to start that package. And then disclosure C7 is the electrical drawings for Stewart Creek Phase 3, and that is 4 pages. So that's the total package for the complainant. And then the respondent has one complete package just labeled as R1, and that is 80 pages.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Frederick, we are ready to hear your evidence.
Good morning. So as I indicated, my name is Al Frederick, and my wife and I are the owners of 477 Stewart Creek Close. I'm going to go back and just give you a little bit of history, very brief, on how we got to where we are today. So this lot is in the town of Canmore. It's in a Three Sisters subdivision, and it backs onto a golf course. We paid in excess of $500,000 for the lot. And we purchased it, I think, 2017, around there. All of 2020, we planned on building our home, so we hired a local contractor, we hired a local architect, and early in 2021, we broke ground in January. One of the early challenges after breaking ground was, and these lots, some of them are zoned for having legal suites in the basement. So the legal suite added about 765 square feet to our 2,300 on the top 2 levels. So one of the early challenges with the build was the builder's electrician came to us and said, these are only 100 amp serviced lots. And keeping in mind, I paid over $500,000 for it. And he said, really 100 amp is not enough to service both the suite and the upper level. So you have 2 kitchens, 2 laundry rooms, a hot tub, all these types of things working off 100 amps. So that became of a great concern to us, and we, the resolution, I suppose, at the time presented was a $25,000 cost to us to break up our neighbor's lawn or dig through the street to gain access to the additional amperage of 200 amps. We came to find out that many of the other tenants or landowners and residents got the 200 amp service, which should have been there in the first place, free, just because they were there early in the development. Fortis was able to run the cable without much cost, and they got the 200 amp service without the $25,000 expense. So that was not something that was, and that was starting to build, and it got worse from there. So that's the first issue that I have, and I put that in my original complaint form, was the amperage. The second challenge was that because we were outside of the 10-minute response time for fire, which I think we're right on the border of that 10-minute response, you had to have a sprinkler system installed in your home, and I provided those invoices in the package. So, you know, it's a safety issue. They said our insurance would look favorable on having that. added to the home. So we added a $10,000 and paid $10,000 for a new sprinkler system. But then when they were getting to the last stages of installation, he said the water pressure in the town is not sufficient at that location to run your sprinkler system. So again, these are infrastructure issues that, and going back to the hydro for a second, the town, I guess, is short-sighted in thinking that the electrification is coming and 200 amp is going to be the norm. And a home such as that doesn't have it is, you know, it's kind of it's counter to what you would intuition saying what we're going to require going forward. So anyway, we got back to this challenge again with the fire response, and this $25,000 to upgrade the water pressure to service our sprinkler system. So $25,000 for the hydro, $25,000 for the sprinkler system. And you know, if you're outside of a zone of response for fire or police or any emergency responders, you should get some sort of tax relief. If I'm paying taxes for like everybody else, but I don't have access to the same service, so or without the same quality of service. So that was our second issue that really threw me for a loop. So, but most importantly, relative to today's hearing, is the 3 residential ratepayer reports. So I appreciate the cooperation that I received throughout this whole process from Deanna and others. But if you look at the 3 ratepayer reports that I've provided, and just let me flip and find the first one. I think, so we're under roll number 21859. So you can see in the main body of the details the quantity of square footage, 2315, and at the bottom a finished basement suite of 765. So that's basically the 2 numbers relative to my comments this morning from my residential ratepayer report. I did send a couple
Just for clarity, Mr. Frederick, that's Exhibit C3 you're referring to?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
So the 2315 reflects the square footage of our main home on the upper 2 levels, above ground. The 765 is below grade. It's a lower, but it is a legal suite. So if you flip the page, in the second part of that disclosure is 473 Stewart Creek. So that's the home immediately north of us, or I should say west of us. And their square footage was 2206, and they also have a legal suite finished of 716 square feet, so very similar. Their lot is smaller than ours. And then the last one, and most importantly, is the home at 481 Stewart Creek, which is immediately to our east, and the square footage of the main home is 3,000, and I've seen in information that has been forwarded by Deanna that their actual square footage was 3,051 square feet, and it's in the information provided by Deanna in disclosure. So it's actually 3,051 square feet. And it doesn't indicate a finished basement here. My understanding, and I've never been in the home, but through discussions with those neighbors, that they do have a fully finished basement with 2 bathrooms and 3 bedrooms. But for some reason, nothing's showing up here on this residential ratepayer report. It'll be a question I'll have for Deanna. So 3,000 square feet is almost 750 feet larger than our home on the top 2 levels. If you look today at the real estate multiple listings in the town of Canmore, it shows you, it breaks out above grade square footage versus below grade on almost every listing. And there's reason for that, because values of above grade structures are more expensive than below grade. So the valuation is quite different. So if you just take the top two levels of almost 700 square feet difference between my neighbor's house being 700 square feet larger than ours is my area of focus here. Their lot is larger, their home is significantly larger, and another little search this morning of real estate listings, a 700 square foot home in the Canmore area ranges from about $500,000 to $700,000. So that's the difference, in my view, in simple terms, between a 3,000 square foot home and a 2,300 square foot home. So and I took the liberty of, and it's in the disclosure again, of an email to Deanna regarding, if we make some simple assumptions, how we can use the 3,000 square feet. And I think if you can find that, it's in an email dated May 18th as part of disclosure. And this is still going to be, I think it's still the same disclosure package at, I think it's C3, is it? Is it C4? Yeah, okay, sir. C4 is that email? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the email is in C4, and I just took the square footage, the additional square footage, timed it by the square foot costs based on just the information that's on the property reports, and it's consistent with what I found on the MLS this morning, that the property would be about, my neighbor's property would be about $541,000 more than ours. And in actuality, that's what they paid more in that range for their home. And if you use the square footage, I did two calculations. One, using the square footage per, the cost per square footage based on my rate of $1,828,000 versus theirs. So I did two different things. Either way, one value of $541,000 was found, and the other one was $412,000. Either way, whatever cost per square footage, that of my house or their house, it was significantly more than our neighbors. So, so that's the crux of it. The last comment I wanted to make was on, I just have to find it here in my notes. So I sent a photograph that was taken from my residence on July 26, 2021. 2021, sorry. And it shows the shell of our home being completed. We took occupancy, and I have that in my files, and I can forward that to you. We took occupancy on December 16th, 2021. So 4.5 months after the July 1st photo. So basically, you saw the shell there, and over the next 4.5 months, the interior was installed in our home. All the plumbing, all the electrical, the flooring, drywall, painting. And there's a significance to the date of July 1st, 2021 in relation to the assessment. And there's a requirement of the assessor to place a value on our home to reflect market conditions on July 1st, 2021. And in our case, that home was substantially unfinished. So there may be a simple explanation for this. So the assessment is required to reflect typical market conditions as if the property had been sold on July 1st, 2021. And in my view, this value, whatever value that is that they placed on our home on July 1st, 2021, is critical in understanding the assessment of my home. I don't have an explanation for a substantially unfinished home, as everyone can see, on that date, and yet my overall assessed value of my home is higher than that of my neighbors. So, and that's the last bit of information or concerns that I've had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frederick. Appreciate that. We'll now move on to any respondent questions. No questions from the respondent. Board questions. We'll start. Ms. Willett. Ms.
I don't
Willett.
have any questions for the applicant or the complainant, but I do have a question for the respondent following your presentation.
All right, Mr. Fodden.
Yes, Mr. Frederick, thank you for that presentation. Did you get estimates, do you have those for the figures you presented for putting a 200-amp service in and for adding a sprinkler system? I think you said each one was going to cost $25,000.
So, I don't have estimates. It was through discussion with the owners of my company. So I don't have estimates, but what happened was they were, because of my persistence, they were able to increase my amperage to 150 without any cost being associated with that. So they upped the amperage in the line for my residents. The water pressure, I said I'm not going to pay $25,000 for additional water pressure, and I still have poor water pressure. It was bantered between the builder, the developer, and myself quite a bit. And at some point, they were able, again, to find this water pressure without further charge. So it was kind of a good ending, but, you know, had I not persisted, it would have cost that.
Thank you. No, that's it, thanks.
I just have a couple questions as well. When you were putting together your analysis of the cost per square foot, did you consider that breaking out the cost of the land and the cost of the building separately? Okay, thank you. And that's great. That's my question. Thank you, sir. All right, we'll move on to the respondents' evidence, please.
All right, as we've already heard, we're here dealing with number 477, Stewart Creek Close. The 2021 property assessment is $1,828,000. I have, excuse me, subsequently gone through and reviewed data on the properties, including the subject, so I do have a recommendation for a revised assessment to $1,823,000, and that's based off a lot size change with the subject property. So on page 4 of my information is a more recent picture of the subject property. On page 5 and on page 6, we show maps or aerial photos, which shows that the property backs onto the golf course. As mentioned, the property is zoned R1B, so that is residential detached plus, which allows for secondary suites in the town of Canmore. So just to give some background onto the assessment process, property assessments for the town of Canmore are prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Municipal Government Act and the associated regulations. Matters relating to assessment and taxation regulation actually establishes the valuation standards to be used, and it defines our procedures to be applied, objectives for the quality to be achieved in the preparation of assessments. So the legislation requires that the municipality prepare assessments that represent market value by application of the mass appraisal process. And all assessments are expected to meet quality standards prescribed by the province in those regulations. Excuse me. Market value is one of the primary foundations of this legislation, and Alberta legislation prescribes that property assessments must be prepared based on the market value. Now, market value means the amount that a property might be expected to realize if it's sold on the open market by a willing seller to a willing buyer. Property assessments for the 2021 assessment year must be an estimate of the value of the property on July 1st, 2021, which is our valuation date, which was referenced by the complainant. But it has to reflect the physical condition of the property on December 31st, 2021, which is our condition date. So what that would mean is that we have to use the market conditions from July 1st, and we move it to whatever condition or whatever physically is there on December 31st using the market conditions of July 1st. So the legislation further stipulates that an assessment of property based on market value must be prepared using mass appraisal, must be an estimate of the value of the fee simple estate in the property, and must reflect typical market conditions for properties similar to that property. Mass appraisal is a legislated methodology for valuing individual properties and involves the following process. Properties are stratified into groups of comparable properties. That could be anything from location to type of property to a type of house. Common property characteristics are identified for properties in each group, and a uniform valuation model is created for each property group. So moving on to page 10, there are 3 different approaches to value. Property assessments for residential properties in the town of Canmore are determined using the direct comparison approach. The direct comparison approach best reflects the typical actions of buyers and sellers when purchasing residential properties, and it mirrors the actions of the market participants when they're making their purchase decision. In order to derive a direct sales comparison approach, we use the sales information from Land Title's office, and the sales are validated. Validation for sales may include site inspections, interviews with involved parties, a review of land title documents, corporate searches, and third-party information. We also rely on MLS information to get additional information. The resulting validated sales are then used to develop valuation models which replicate market behavior. The sale price reflects the condition of a property on the sale date, but may not be equal to the assessed value. For the 2021 valuation of residential properties, sales occurring from July 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2021 were analyzed. So the direct comparison approach was applied to the subject property for the 2022 assessment, 2021 assessment rules. Sorry, we keep switching years, but it is the 2021 assessment year. And the calculation of the property is demonstrated on page 11. And we can see that it is a 2315 two-story with basement property, which has the lower suite finish in it. On page 12, I've gone through a process of validating the assessment through a direct comparison approach, and this is by using comparable property sales, all of two-story custom quality properties along the same street as the subject property. On page 13, you can see proximity-wise where these properties are to the subject property. So there were, as I mentioned before, I did do a review of the area based on the information that we've received from the complainant to ensure that the data, the data integrity is correct. There were changes made to 3 of the properties and a 4th if you include the subject property. With regards to lot size primarily, but the one property, there were some properties where we were missing basement finish, basement suite finish, and so that was added as well. So when you're looking at the 2022 assessment column on page 12, that's a reflection of the corrected assessed value. So the subject property, the revised assessment, as mentioned before, it was for 1.823. And so looking at the different properties in relationship to the subject property, the most comparable would be the properties with the larger lot sizes. So the most comparable properties would be the last 2 that I have on that chart. The property at 465 Stewart Creek Close, it's a little bit older. It's a 2017 year built, but it is the 2734 square feet. We have a revised assessment for that one at 1.954, and that property sold for 2.3, approximately 2.3 in 2020. The last one on the list is number 481 Stewart Creek Close. The revised assessment for that one is $2,106,000. It's a little bit smaller lot size, and it is the one that the property, the complainant has referenced as well. We have the floor area now at 3,051, and we have that property sold for 2.102021 time-adjusted sale price in 2018. There's more specific details on pages 40.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat that sale price for me? Thank you.
$2,102,021. That's our sale price adjusted to July 1st, 2021. Sales detail, the land title documents and the detail sheets that show all of the changes that went into these revised assessments can be found on pages 47 to 74. On page 14, I've also included the neighbors' properties that were referenced from the complainant's information. Again, these properties we've gone through a review of them and have corrected the data on them. And we have the property at 473 Stewart Creek Close coming in at $1,753,000 for a smaller lot area and a smaller square footage built in 2018 versus the 2020 for the the subject property. And as mentioned before, we have the property at 481 Stewart Creek Close. The revised assessment information is now $2,106,000 for a slightly smaller square footage on the lot, 3 years older, and it is the 3,051 square feet on that property. So that concludes any of the evidence that I wanted to enter or to bring forward. Basically, assessments are a reflection of the market as of July 1st, 2021, but the condition of December 31st, 2021. I do believe it's the assessor's opinion that the assessment for the subject property is within the range for all of the other properties based on the sale prices and the assessments along that street. Although sympathetic to the complainant for the headaches maybe that were incurred during the build, I do believe that it's the current market value that needs to be looked at, not some of the details that went into some of the construction and some of the issues with the developers. I don't believe they'd be recovered in the end, and I do believe that the other houses along that street, although they didn't have to pay directly for some of these things, are all impacted in the same way. So I do ask that the Assessment Review Board revise the assessment to $1,823,000. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your presentation. Complainant, do you have any questions you'd like to ask based?
Thanks again. The first question, just right at the end, she mentioned a revised assessed value. I didn't catch it.
$1,823,000.
Okay, so that was what was in the disclosure package. So a question, would you agree that two homes side by side, one being 700 square feet larger than the one beside it, typically would have a higher assessed value?
I do, yeah, and that's why where I put the information, we revised the assessment so that it is reflective and the assessment is now higher than yours to account for that.
And so just for the record, the respondent's response was that the neighboring property, which I believe is 481, was reassessed for 2021. Thank you.
And is there a value that was established for the market value in July 1st of 2021? Is there an absolute value that we could look at?
It is in the disclosure document.
Sorry, can I ask you maybe just to come up to the mic and if you
Yeah.
can kind of just both share, just so we get a clear record. Thank you.
So you're talking about the property at 481 Stewart Creek Close?
No, for my own, there's a significance to that date of July 1st, 2021, reflecting the market value.
Mm-hmm.
What is that value on that date in regard to my house?
That would be the revised assessed value at $1,823,000.
Okay, so when they do that, do they make some concessions, or do they consider the fact that it was not a finished residence at that time, substantially not finished?
So the market conditions that we're required to look at, that's through an analysis of all the sales of all the properties in your area. So we're setting the market conditions as for that timestamp of July 1st, 2021. The legislation also stipulates, though, that it has to be the physical condition of your property on December 31st, 2021 for the following year's assessment. So what that means is we're taking your condition date as fully complete in December 31st, but we're taking those market conditions and bringing it up to your December 31st. So we're just applying that market, that real estate picture, onto December 31st. So yeah, when you're talking about your July 1st valuation, if it had been fully completed on July 1st, that would also have been the same assessment. But we have to use the December 31st condition date.
So it would have been the same assessment?
Yeah.
Had it been finished or not on July 1st?
If it was not finished on December 31st, then it would have been a reflection of a partially complete home.
Gotcha.
Might as well stay.
Yeah, thanks, Deanna, for your presentation. You answered my question, actually, through the discussion on the July 1st date versus the December 31st date. Thank you.
Thanks, Deanne. Could you give us the reference for the section of the matters relating to assessment and taxation regulation that says that it's the physical condition date as of December 31st?
I can. It might take me a few seconds to go through it. And I believe it's in the MGA, not the regulations.
I have it in Part 1, Standards of Assessment, Valuation Date, Paragraph 6. It's in the Matters Relating to Assessment and Taxation Regulations, so MRAT,
Okay.
M-R-A-T.
Mhm.
Valuation date. It says that has to be prepared on July 1st of the assessment year.
Mhm.
And then it talks about the market valuation that you speak about.
Yeah. I'm just gonna, to find the exact section, it's never been, I've never had that question before.
Yeah, I just think it would be
So
helpful
it's-
for Mr. Frederick.
It's section 2891 of the MGA, and it's assessments for property other than designated industrial property. And so it's section 289, subsection 2, and it says each assessment must reflect the characteristics and physical condition of the property on December 31st of the year prior to the year in which a tax is imposed under Part 10 in respect to property, and then the valuation and other standards as set out in the regulations for that property.
Okay, thank you. I have another question for you.
Sure.
In your material Exhibit R1, page 12, you have a list of comparable properties. And I'm wondering whether you take into account the zoning of those properties, and are those properties all zoned for legal basement suites as well?
Just one moment and I'll verify that for you. For sure, the last two are zoned the same as the subject property. I believe they all are, but I'm just double checking that so I give you the right information. Yes, they are all zoned R1 residential detached.
With legal basement suites?
With the, yeah, that zoning includes the legal
Thank you.
basement suites.
And just while we're looking at that table on page 12 of Exhibit R1, and so for clarity, the values in blue font are the revised assessments?
Mhm.
Thank you. And though it says 2022 assessment, it's for the 2021 year, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. And when were those revised assessments made?
They haven't been. We did the calculation based on if the data had been there, And this is what the resulting, if the data had been corrected, what the resulting assessment would be, similar to even the lot size changes we have for the subject property. We're bringing it forward as a revised assessment to its benefit. But at this time, we usually do revisions such as this when we find it through complaints. We usually do them for the next year. We include the data and then revalue them in its entirety. We have the ability through Section 305(1) of the MGA where we can send out revised notices. So yes, no, we have not sent out the notices yet.
Okay, so I guess that's, you're anticipating my question, and I appreciate that very much. So for the nice people that own 481, Stewart Creek Close, they've not received an increase assessment for 2021, and they may or may not, depending on whether you make that call or whether the town makes that call. Is that fair?
It would be the assessor who makes that call. Usually, there's a complaint process, and usually it's used for properties that feel that their assessments are too high. And I mean, obviously, if we were to send out revised notices on these, the property owners would have another opportunity to appeal their assessment. Usually it's, for lack of a better term, it's if you snooze, you lose kind of mentality. We do like to give the advantage to the property owners rather than, you know, we do find through re-inspections, we do find through phone calls, we do find additional information or errors in our data continuously throughout the year. It doesn't mean that we're always going to send out a revised notice. In the current year, we kind of do the benefit of the doubt and usually send it out for the next year.
And catch it up next year.
Yep.
So the nice people that own 481 will likely see a higher assessment.
They'll see
did
it.
see a higher assessment for 2022.
They'll see an assessment that's more reflective of similar properties now that their data's been standardized to be consistent with the
And
neighbors.
they'll see that notice next spring, I guess, right?
In February, mid-February, they'll get their assessment notices next year.
Great, thank you. And just following up on Mr. Fodden's question a little bit. So basements versus basement suites, is there anything in the mass appraisal model where you would look at valuation, finished, unfinished basement versus actually a revenue generating suite?
So we don't actually look at the revenue that could be achieved on some of the basement suites. Sometimes people don't rent them. And sometimes people have their family members rent them. How we account for it in our valuation process is it's the quality of finish. If you have a basement suite, you obviously have more of a finished area. You have a better quality, generally finished area, which means that you have a kitchen with kitchen cabinets, generally. You usually have a family room area, usually 1 or 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom that would accommodate, shower or bathtub as well, at least one.
Great, and we can kind of see that in your assessment sheets, right? Those parameters that you include or don't include?
Yeah, so if we want to look at the one specifically that had the most changes, we're talking about the 481 Stewart Creek Close, you can find that on page 71. And I've highlighted the information that's been added to this property. So you can see it's actually quite a significant amount of information that's been updated.
Great, thank you very much. All right, those are my questions. Thank you for your responses. We'll now move on to any rebuttal evidence on behalf of the complainant. Do you have anything further you'd like to bring forward?
No further evidence, sir, but I do have a final comment.
Okay, I'll give you an opportunity in a moment. So we'll actually then move to what we'll call arguments or summations. So if you would like to come up and give us your kind of final thoughts and arguments, thank you.
Thanks again. I suppose if we boiled this down to simple terms, we live in a beautiful home and we are next door to a home that's 700 square feet or thereabouts larger than ours. I don't think the newly assessed values still reflect the difference in those two homes. That's above grade. So they have 700 square feet above grade, more than ours, and then they have a finished basement like ours. It's just not a suite. So I did send a couple of photos to Deanna regarding our suite not being completely finished. I don't know if it's I guess that is new evidence. But I did send a couple of photos showing that we didn't put an island in, we didn't put flooring in. It is substantially unfinished simply because my wife now has second thoughts about people living in our home. As we just discussed, it probably will remain vacant. One thing that the town did insist upon was that we have additional parking for the tenant. So we did that. But then they wanted an additional bicycle rack covered. We did that. All of these ancillary issues, and we were happy to do those things for the tenant to keep, the streets clear and that sort of thing. But the significant infrastructure issues that I talked about earlier, hydro, water pressure, these types of things, I think the town needs to refocus on those issues, especially with the electrification that's coming down the pipeline. And so those would be my final comments. I want to thank everyone.
You're welcome. We appreciate you coming in today and making your presentations and putting your evidence before us. A summation from the respondent?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I should respond to anything that's been brought up new in the summation.
It's your argument. You can argue whatever you like.
Okay, I'll just close. So basically, we have provided sales of properties. We've provided 7 sales of properties of very similar location, very similar houses along the same street. We've provided the differences in their sizes, ages, lot sizes, and different physical components. They basically support the assessment of the revised assessment amount of 1.823. Assessments, like we said, have to be assessed at market value, which is the most, and they have to be used with mass appraisal principles. So we have used those sales that we had, that we've provided on page 12. They have been used in the preparation of the assessment for the subject property. And we do feel that with the slight revision of the lot size, that we would recommend that the assessment be revised to $1,823,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies. Thank you very much. Last word to the complainant. Anything further you'd like to add, sir?
Nothing further.
Great. Thank you very much. So on behalf of my panel members, we would like to thank everyone for your cooperation and your very helpful presentations here this morning. At this time, I would like to ask the parties if they feel they have been heard today and if they feel they have received a fair hearing. Positive responses, thank you. I will now declare the hearing closed. No further evidence or submissions may be received by the board. And we appreciate your input today. Thank you. The Municipal Government Act requires that a written decision within 30 days and gives the clerk an additional 7 days to issue a decision. We will make every effort to meet or beat these requirements, and the clerk will forward our decision to you at our earliest convenience. We'll now proceed with our next scheduled hearing.
Adrian, are you ready to go? I think we've got it sorted on our end now.
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right. Over to you, Dale.
Good morning and welcome to this Canmore Local Assessment Review Board hearing. I would like to remind everyone that the Assessment Review Board hearings are open to the public and that this hearing will be recorded and streamed live. The video recording will be our record of the hearing. We are here today to review the complaint and subsequent evidence as filed for Tax Roll 10546, municipal address 633 2nd Street here in Canmore. I will start by introducing the panel and ask the parties to introduce themselves. After that, I will explain our standard hearing procedure and ask for comments in that regard. My name is Dale Hildebrand, and I am the presiding officer appointed to this panel. The other panel members with me today are Ms. Michelle Ouellette and Mr. William Fodden. Does anyone have any objection to the panel as constituted? Complainant?
No objections.
Thank you. Respondent? Great, thank you. I'm now going to have the parties introduce themselves, starting with the complainant. Would you please state your name for the record?
My name is Adrian Blajo.
And can you please confirm for me that you're the owner of the property at 633 2nd Street here in Canmore?
I confirm.
Thank you. Now the respondent, would you please state your name and record, name for the record, organization, and your position with the municipality?
Sure. My name's Deanne Bannerman. I'm with Benchmark Assessment Consultants, and I am the assessor for the town of Canmore.
Thank you, Ms. Bannerman. The Local Assessment Review Board hearing standard practice is to first have the complainant present all of their evidence, followed by questions from the respondent and then the panel. Next, the respondent will present their evidence, followed by questions from the complainant and then from the panel. The complainant will then have an opportunity for rebuttal. Finally, both parties will have an opportunity to present their arguments and finalize their evidence for the panel, with the complainant presenting first. If anyone needs a break or a problem comes up, please let the panel know as soon as possible and we can address those things as we go. I will also take this time to remind everyone to turn off any mobile devices. Are there any questions regarding the procedure today? And is everyone satisfied with the process as I've laid it out? Complainant?
Yes.
Thank you. Respondent, okay. Are there any preliminary issues? Complainant?
No.
Thank you. Respondent? Thank you. I see that both parties have exchanged disclosure evidence before the hearing. To save time, I propose that we mark all documents for the record now. That won't stop anyone raising questions about admissibility later. If any such questions arise, we can still deal with them and strike material from the record as appropriate. Is everybody comfortable with this procedure?
Yes.
Confirmed, thank you. All right, I'll now ask the clerk to go through and mark the pre-filed evidence with exhibit numbers.
Okay, so we'll go with the complainant package first. So we've assembled it into one package with sort of subsections. We've got complainant disclosure C1, which is the original complaint form and attachments, and that is 17 pages. Complainant disclosure C2 is email of the evidence summary, and that is 3 pages. Disclosure C3 is a March 3rd initial response. So that's an email that is 2 pages. The next we have C4, mass model concerns, and that's 5 pages. And C5, land values on Bow River, and that's 2 pages. And then C6, large area, that's 6 pages. There are some blank pages in there, but but we've numbered them anyways, just to make sure we all have the same number of pages. And then C7, acreages, which is 3 pages. And lastly, C8 is the 1-page rebuttal, which is an email. So that completes the complainant package. And then the respondent package is one full package labeled R1, and it is 116 pages.
All right, thank you very much for giving us those exhibit numbers. Okay, Ms. Blazo, would you please proceed, and we're ready to hear your evidence.
Great, thank you. I have good news. I won't be speaking to all those pages and pages of information provided. Most of it is relative to a general issue, which is not really the matter at hand in front of us today. So today I want to cover 4 things. First, I'd like to have the board reassess my assessment based on properties on my street on the same block and on the same side of my street. That's one. And then I'd like to address the validity of the sales comparables provided in the rebuttal from Benchmark. And third, I'd like to take a moment just to walk through a quick calculation as to how I got to my assessment. And finally, that being said, just a couple of observations if there's time to share with the board. How does that sound?
Please proceed, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so the first thing is, in order to be fair and equitable, I would like to be compared to properties on my street, particularly those on the same side of the street and on the same block. And I have provided on page 2 of my initial complaint a selection of properties that are similar. What I've observed is that on my street, I have the smallest, oldest house and yet the highest assessed value, at least on my side of the street, and relative to one other. And obviously, I don't think that's correct. So in order to kind of make an example or share something with you that's tangible, I've picked out several units and put them in the disclosure, but I'll draw your attention to the property 6132 Street. And this property was built in 2000. It was built by the same builder as my property. And it is 1,000 square feet larger. And it is assessed at $100,000 less than my property. So a property that's 1,000 square feet larger, newer, is valued $100,000 less than my property. And I just didn't think that made sense. So I started to sort of explore. And that's where the myriad of other things that I assessed came up. Just a second here. I really can't do that right now. One, there you go. Oh, there you go. Yeah, so that's where I got to with that one. So that's point 1. Point 2, I'd like to address the sales comparators provided as part of the rebuttal. And what that really speaks to me is that houses with recent sales are experiencing extremely high year-over-year increases. And my concern is that there's something in the model that is skewing it in favor, or skewing it in a way that penalizes new home buyers, new people to Canmore. And to demonstrate that point, the sales comparators that I was asked to consider, the two all experienced very high year-over-year increases. And the two that are custom homes, similar to mine, one experienced a $620,000 year-over-year increase, and the other a $500,000 year-over-year increase. And so I can't accept a rebuttal where my house is compared to houses that have had excessive, I would say excessive increases year over year. Any questions so far?
We'll come to questions at the end. Just please keep going. Thanks.
Okay, fair enough. So the cost per square foot of a home on 2th Street at the age that mine is roughly around $160,000 per square foot. And applying that to, so now we'll just sort of sum up, like applying that to my house, the land values are $925 pretty consistently, and applying the square footage, cost per square foot for a home my age, gets you roughly around 1.25 million, and I'm currently assessed at 1.65 million. So I think we're pretty far out of the ballpark relative to my neighbors and the consistency and equity expected across all properties. I do not dispute that I paid 1.65 for my property, but that's only one factor which should influence the model to move in a certain direction, but not to have my property immediately gravitate to its sale price. That's contrary to mass appraisal processes. So that's point 3. So we've got compare my property to houses on my street. I would not suggest we justify the value of my house based on other properties that are experiencing potentially a similar problem year over year. And that third, if you do the basic calculations, the value of my house is relative to my neighbors is about 1.25. And then, so finally for observations, I think I already alluded to this, but in some of my emails, but what I've seen so far is that there appear to be too many subcategories within the model, which makes it really difficult to create equity across the numerous subcategories, because if there's not sales in the subcategory, it makes it difficult for the model to move. And second, I have to acknowledge that this is a very difficult environment to navigate with the sales prices increasing so significantly so quickly. And then finally, I think this is for the board and even for Benchmark. This problem is what I'm seeing is this bias is difficult to observe, because the folks that are getting their assessments, they're new to Canmore, and when their assessment matches what they pay for it, you snooze, you lose, as the Benchmark was saying. And so you're feeling quite comfortable because I just paid this amount and that's what my assessment is. Phew, I didn't overpay. But not taking it the step further, snoozing, as they say, they don't notice that their property is increasing much more significantly than their neighbors. And I have several examples of that that have been provided. So I think it's just something that is going to be very difficult for the board and Benchmark to uncover, because you're not going to get the complaints that you would for a typical problem within the model. So I just thought we should be aware of that. And as we move forward, perhaps there's some other areas and other places that are also being impacted in an unfair way. So that's pretty much it. That's all I got for you guys today, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much for those comments. Any questions from the respondent?
Okay, I just would like confirmation. So through the chair, I'd just like confirmation from the complainant that the purchase price that was listed, or the purchase price for the property, was $1,640,000, which was registered at land titles in October of 2020.
Yes.
And then my final question is, that there's been no argument or evidence provided from the complainant that any of the property characteristics on this subject property as provided by the assessor is incorrect.
That's correct.
That's all my questions.
Great, thank you. We'll now move to board questions. Ms. Solette?
Thanks. I don't have any questions for you.
No questions for me either.
Yeah, I don't have any questions for you at this time either. We'll now move forward to the respondents' evidence.
Sorry. As discussed, we are referencing the property assessment on property number 633 2nd Street in Canmore. The property is currently assessed for $1,642,000. So during my presentation, I'm going to demonstrate to the board that the valuation standard for the subject property is market value, and that the assessor must prepare assessments in a fair and equitable manner. So background on this property, you can see on page 4 and page 5 and page 6, we have a photograph of the exterior of the property, as well as maps and aerial photography showing the general proximity of the subject property, which is in the South Canmore neighborhood. The subject property is an R1 residential detached zoned property. So I'm going to go into a little bit of a background into the assessment process. So property assessments for the town of Canmore are prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Municipal Government Act and matters relating to assessment and taxation regulation. This regulation and act establish the valuation standards to be used, it defines the procedures to be applied, and it defines the objectives for the quality to be achieved in the preparation of assessments. The legislation requires that the municipality prepare assessments that represent market value by application of the mass appraisal process. All assessments are expected to meet the quality standards prescribed by the province in the MRAT regulations, and we are audited annually as well. We have to pass audit. So market value, Alberta legislation prescribes that property assessments must be prepared based on market value. Market value means the amount that a property might be expected to realize if it is sold on the open market by a willing buyer to a willing seller. Other way around, sorry. Property assessments for the 2021 assessment year must be an estimate of the value of the property on July 1st, 2021, which we call our valuation date, and it must reflect the physical condition of the property on December 31st, 2021, which is our condition date. The legislation further stipulates that an assessment of property based on market value must be prepared using mass appraisal, must be an estimate of the value of the fee simple estate in the property, and must reflect typical market conditions for properties similar to that property. So mass appraisal is the legislated methodology used for valuing individual properties, and it involves the following process. Properties are stratified into groups of comparable properties. Common property characteristics are identified for the properties in each group, and then a uniform valuation model is created for each group of properties. There are 3 approaches to value when we're talking about assessment, and property assessments for residential properties in the town of Canmore primarily are determined using the direct sales comparison approach. The direct comparison approach best reflects the typical actions of buyers and sellers when purchasing real residential properties, and it mirrors the actions of market participants when making their purchase decisions. Sales information is received from the land titles office, and the sales are validated. Validation may include site inspections, interviews with involved parties, a review of land title documents, corporate searches, third-party information, and we do also rely on MLS information. The resulting validated sales are used to develop the valuation models to replicate market behavior. So what that means is that we take the knowns, which is our sales, and we use it as a proxy to determine the assessments for all of the other properties that fall into that same category. So the sale price reflects the condition of a property on a sale date, and it may not be equal to the assessed value. Part of the mass appraisal is that we're using all the sales of similar properties, so it would be rare for an assessment to be exactly on their sale price because we're using all of the sales of the similar properties. For the 2022 valuation of residential properties, sales occurring from July 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2021 were analyzed. I'm going to talk a little bit about units in comparison because it's been brought up in the complainant's information. And I just want to be clear that when we're using units of comparison, so that would be a sale price per square foot, or it would be a sale price per finished area, sale price per lot, anything that we're breaking down into a price per unit, it does make it easier to compare and adjust properties that compete in the same market. So it is something that is reliable to use, but the other side of it is that the value of this dependent variable, which is the size per square foot, it really depends on if everything else is exactly the same. When not everything is exactly the same, then you have to actually take into account the differences. So it's not a straight, flat sale price or cost per square foot. So the subject property, as mentioned, is a property in the South Canmore neighborhood. It is 6591 square foot lot. It was built in 1996, but it has had renovations, and so it's been effective age to 2001. It is a 2-story basementless custom quality home. So on page 13, I've included sales of 2-story, no basement homes in the same property as the subject property. We'll note the last two on the list on page 13 are the same construction quality and have the same similar construction quality to the subject property. The three below the subject property, there's semi-custom, which is an inferior quality construction to the subject property, but they've still been put in because of the similarities, although they should generate lower assessed values, but they have been put in for comparison. There's a lot of different properties in South Canmore, so trying to capture and have enough sales of any in order to show this sometimes is challenging, so we include all of them. Sorry. I would like to point out that the fifth comparable on that page 13, I will say is in a superior location to the subject property as well, so should generate a higher assessed value.
Sorry, can you just give us the address?
Sure,
to make
yeah,
sure we're
it's
looking at the right
1008 3rd Avenue. It should be the last on the list on page 13. You can see from the map at the bottom of the page that it actually backs the creek.
And sorry, just to clarify, you felt that was an inferior location?
Superior location,
I'm sorry, I
yeah,
missed.
to the subject property. Unfortunately, it's not a bunch of cookie cutter houses. If it were, it would be a lot easier. So on page 14, we've also done a validation of the assessment through equity comparables. Again, all of this information can be found in the in further pages, so the equity comparable information can be found on pages 62 to 67 of my evidence. We've listed all of the comparables. These are all two-story, no basements. They're all custom properties. And we've indicated on the second last row whether they're inferior or superior to the subject property. So looking at the range of comparables on similar locations, I've also plotted them out on the map. Some of them do back onto green space, but it is also a parking lot, which isn't like exactly the same as backing onto a park. Oh, sorry, I was waiting for, sorry. Okay, so, sorry. I just want to point out, that neighboring properties are not necessarily equity comparables just because they're on the same road. If they're not similar to the subject property, then they wouldn't be considered comparable, I guess, in a way. So there is a decision that I've included on page 104. So in Tony Prysa versus the City of Edmonton, 2013 ELARB 00099, the board held that it was unacceptable to simply take an average per square foot value of neighboring properties and apply that average to the subject without taking into account differing characteristics of the property, which is a point that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about units of measure. So on page 15, I've taken, I think, the majority of the comparables that the subject, that the complainants brought forward, and just to kind of point out some of the differences between them. So I just want to highlight that the sales in the red font, or in the colored font, it actually are transactions, sales transactions that occurred outside of our valuation range. So there was one sale, 501 5th Street, which occurred in 2016, which was prior to our analysis. And then we have an additional two, the one at 441 5th Street and 317 Willow Point, that occurred after the valuation date of July 1st, 2021. I also want to point out that 317 Willow Point, that property since has actually had permits on it, so it did sell for mostly vacant land at the time because it has been demoed to foundation. And you can see photos of the property and permit information on page 87. Also on that same chart, I do want to point out that the construction quality on these properties would not be considered comparable. The most comparable on this chart would be the property at 425 2nd Street, which the assessors also used as a sales comparable. But the quality of construction, there's been references to properties such as 441 5th Street. That is near the top of our quality classification, so it should be assessed higher and is.
Sorry, 441 5th Street?
Yeah.
Can you, what unit is, sorry, why is that one comparable to my property?
It's a vastly superior construction quality to your property.
Yeah, I just a point, am I allowed to just to clarify something here?
Yeah, maybe just hold your questions for a few moments where I think the respondent's almost done with her presentation, and then we'll let you ask your questions.
Okay, so as I mentioned, the construction qualities are, there's a range in there. And I do feel that the sales comparables that the assessors provided are a lot more reasonable. Also on page 15 is the complainant's equity comparables. Again, you know, I do feel that the 6 that the assessors provided are more comparable than the properties provided by the complainant. I do want to point out that the subject property, so we do look at sales, and there's been some question as to the bias behind sales versus unsold, and we do get audited on that on an annual basis as well. Sales are used, like I mentioned before, as the proxy for the unsold properties. So we only have information on the sales. That's the only, because we have to achieve market value. We need to use the sales, and they will drive the market and the models. They have to. That's the way that the models work. So for a sale to be similar to its assessment, well, that means we're kind of, you know, that's how the model wants. It won't be exactly because we're using all the sales, but the sales do drive the valuation. They certainly do. But I do want to note that that same valuation that's been produced using those sales, those same formulas, those same models, they're then applied back to the same properties, the same data elements and things like that. So there's no bias in, we're not changing an assessment for a property that's sold independent of all the other properties in its classification. And I do want to stress as well that the subject property did sell on July 1st, October 2nd, 2020, which is approximately 9 months before our valuation date. And it sold for $1,640,000, which is the same as the assessed value. If the sale had been adjusted to the market conditions of July 1st, 2021, the sale would be a time-adjusted sale price of $1,707,700, which is 4% below the assessed value. And I do want to say, I do want to go back to the comparability of the properties that have been brought forward. So there's been a lot of information. If we look at the complainant's information on, you know, in all C1, C2, C4, C5, C6, and C7, there's a lot of comparable or properties that have been brought up that are not comparable to the subject property. On pages, I think it's page 2 on C4 from the complainant. The complainant even says in the email that these properties are not comparable to the subject property. And I'm not referring to the ones that they've put in their neighborhood. I'm referring to the properties on the Bow River and some of the other properties that are not adequately zoned or similarly zoned or similar at all. So I just do want to note that there is, I do have a page which addresses all the differences between all of those on page 112 of my disclosure. For some of the additional information that was brought forward, I have shown some of the non-comparability for it. There's properties that are most of these properties are in the multiple acres. We're talking about a much smaller residential lot. We have some that are being held for future development or purchased for future development. Redevelopment, we have direct control. There's been a couple properties in on Harvey Heights Road that were brought up. These are they're zoned wildlife conservation. So they're older homes on acreages, and I know the zoning no longer allows for that use. So if they were to be demolished or even to burn down, they would likely not be allowed to rebuild on those areas unless it was rezoned. And there's also been the property at 500 Three Sisters, which is the McNeil House, which is a historic designation. So the point I'm trying to say is that a lot of these properties that have been brought forward as comparables or to support a change in the assessed value are not comparable properties at all. So I do believe that the sale and equity comparables that the assessor has provided, they are more comparable to the subject property than those of the complainant. Most significant of that, as mentioned before, is the sale of the subject property, which sold 9 months before the valuation date at $1,640,000. So the assessor requests that the 2021 assessment for this property be confirmed at $1,642,000.
Yes, please, might as well. Great, thank you so much for your presentation. I'd now like to move on to complaint questions. Ms. Bazo, would you like to go ahead and ask your questions now, please?
Oh, I'm to ask questions at this moment?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, the first one was the clarification that I was interjected a bit early on. The reason for providing the information that Deanna was referring to was only to demonstrate there are some significant things within the results of this mass model that just don't jive. I am not in any way comparing my home to 500 Three Sisters. That was not my intent. So I don't debate that the house on Willow Street or whatever are far superior than mine. They just demonstrate a pattern that I observed when I was scratching my head trying to understand how my house went up so much year over year. And I really couldn't. And so that's the case. So Deanna, can you explain for me how the model would have generated an increase of $680,000 on the home on 3rd Avenue and an increase of $500,000+ on the home on my street? What in the model has changed year over year to drive those types of increases?
So there's a couple pieces. First, we did do a reinspection of the South Canmore neighborhood and did a lot of the verification of our data last summer, not this one, summer before, 2021. So we did do a lot of updating of our information at that time. Naturally, it's inevitable when we do re-inspections that there's going to be a little bit more variation in percent changes because we're cleaning up the information. The other part of it would be the sales information. So as mentioned, we do rely on all sorts of external sources for sales information as well as our own. So we may have been able to update information along with our physical reinspection from MLS information or sales information that we had. And the third and probably the most important piece that I really want to stress is that the sales are used to derive the model. The sales of different types of properties may change at different times compared to each other. Some locations will have different percent changes than others, and certain types of properties within these locations will see different percent changes compared to the others. So every year, we're required, the assessor's required, to prepare a new assessment annually. Every year, throw out the old, start with the new. So we build our models new every year, and they have to be reflective of what the market conditions are of July 1st, in this case, 2021. So we go through and we do the analysis of the 3 years' worth of sales. Obviously, we're always using the 3 years, so 1 year will drop off from the prior year's valuation, and we get a brand new year to work with. So the sales, in a lot of times, really are what's driving that. Although we did do a reinspect, we did get extra information on some of the sales properties through MLS, it really is the sale prices. I mean, the town has experienced significant increases in their values over the last year prior to this valuation date of July 1st. They did experience significant changes, and not all properties, because we have to prepare each assessment annually, not all properties experience the same amount. I don't know if that answered your question.
Not really, no. So you've got an algorithm, and in the algorithm, it's going to be fed by information from sales. What specifically in these 3 houses, besides the fact they recently sold, what about them that in that model has caused them to change so significantly relative to their neighbors, or to relative to the neighborhood which they're in South Canmore? What did you learn?
I don't know if there isn't physical changes to it, it really is a reflection. And like I said, we do change the valuation methodology or models. They do get changed annually when we have new sales on. We're always trying to better capture the market as of the valuation date. I don't have any specific information of why that would have, other than what I've already mentioned of it being the sales that do drive that. And those sales are used to derive the assessments of all the similar properties. So there's no, although we may be able to see more plainly the properties that sold, those same values are placed on the non-sold properties.
Okay, can you look at page 11 of my initial complaint? Okay.
Your page 11 or the
Yes,
board's?
my page 11.
Okay.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, so in the table, we have 4 properties. They were all selected by an appraiser at a time when I purchased my house as comparable properties. As you see, the first one in there is my property that sold for 1.64 and is assessed at 1.642. The second property was considered an equivalent, which eventually sold for 1.69 and is assessed at 1.363. The Willow Point property, which sold for $2 million, is assessed at $1.438 million. And the 425 Second Street was sold for $1.875 and $1.844. In looking at those dates, do you see a pattern in the assessed value versus the sale value? And what pattern do you see?
I would suggest, my response to this question would be that we look at all of the sales to pinpoint 3 or 4 and try and derive any kind of statistical strength from it would be a little misleading. As mentioned, we do use all sales in the preparation of the assessments. So I don't see any kind of meaningful statistical trend
Okay.
Sorry,
another
just,
question
just,
then.
to follow up on that, I also have gone through, and as part of my presentation, and listed the comparability of these properties to yours, even to the point of the 317 Willow Point, which has now since been demolished down to foundation.
So that's fair, but the sales data indicated it was worth $2 million very recently. The choice to demolish is neither here nor there relative to a mass model.
Sorry, was there a question?
I guess maybe just a clarification. So the question is now, so 425 2nd Street increased its assessment by roughly $500,000 year over year, matching its exact sale price within $30,000. Obviously, that information was part of the model that drove the increase. Whereas on 317, that same information was available, and yet it remained at 1.4 million. So why aren't these the examples that you're giving me that justify the increase? Why are those not seemingly impacting comparable properties? So the list of properties in there are from the appraiser saying these properties are equivalent or in the same ballpark as yours. 2 of the properties sold before the date that sold within the date, it could be influenced by the model, and the other 2 did not. The ones that did not kept their low value, and the ones that did sell went to the higher value. What about the model in these properties that are considered comparable by an appraiser or certified appraisal? What in the model is driving that behavior?
So I'm going to kind of reiterate what I've already said. It is the sales that drive the values. That's the direct comparison approach. That's how it works. And then we derive models from those sales and apply them to the population. So mass appraisal is not a specific number. It can't be measured in this number is 100% right. It's actually a range of values, and that's why when we are audited and to meet quality standards, there's a range in values. We're able to, for residential properties, have our assessment to sales ratios fall, for the group, fall between 0.95 and 1.05, or 105% of the assessed value of the sale price. So that range in values is for the larger strata. When you go beyond that, you will find properties that even sell for less than they're assessed at, or greater, by more than that 5% on either side. And that's a normal part of mass appraisal. They don't all fall within that range because we have to take the sales of all these properties, which have different motivations, say. Some people will prefer a house, like we were talking about in Willow Point. They're going to pay $2 million for this house and demo it down to foundation and rebuild on it. Because whatever their motivations are, they felt that that property was worth the $2 million, and then the construction of the new property above it. So different people who buy and sell are motivated by different things. Generally overall, that's why we have the range, 0.95 to 1.05. That's why we have the range, because it's not a perfect science. People aren't perfect. People don't go and spend the exact same amount for the exact same thing, ever. Even the same person might, a month different, spend their money on something different. So that's why it's a mass appraisal process. So even when you look at page 15 of my submission, you'll see that the ASR has been listed. And the ASR is not all at one. It's not even all at 95 to 105% of the sale price. It does have a range in value. Obviously, the 3 properties that we didn't use in the valuation, we didn't have the information, so you can see, some ratios that are a little bit lower, some that are a little bit higher. But in future years, we'll get those sales, and they'll be used to derive the next year's models.
I think that's part of my concern. I'm not hearing the answer that says, in the model, this parameter in this algorithm generates this result, so that I could understand why the properties that have a similar, I'd say similar issue that mine do, going up. Like, I mean, honestly, the property value went up by 50% on the one on down the street from us. And the only thing I can see is that it's sold. So there's got to be something really specific you could share with me about the model that's driving this, only to apply or primarily to apply. But I hear that you don't have an answer for that, so I'm not going to ask it again. But what I will ask you to do is look at page 12.
Of your submission?
My page 12.
Your page 12?
Yes, thank you. So here I compiled a list of data of sales in my area. And as you said, it's very low probability that you're going to get around 1 for the match between sale price and assessed value. And I've highlighted here in the bar, horizontal bar, showing the sale price versus assessed value price of these properties. And I've highlighted the area of like the past year before your cutoff date, and then going forward. And what I see here is a pattern that if you bought your house in that time frame, your assessed value is almost exactly equal to the sale price. If you bought your house 1 month later, it's random. And I just don't understand how a mass model can generate that type of result. And that's the answer I'm looking for. What about that group of properties, the ones that just sold last year, is being influenced in the model in a way that's different than the ones that sold the following month?
So I would have a very difficult time addressing anything that you've got on the bottom of page 12. No, there has not been any data provided where I can even see where the data elements are, or even the number of properties that were used. I can only say that when we're preparing the assessment, we do use the sales of all valid sales transactions from land titles when we're preparing the assessment. So to look at a little sample or a sample of information where I don't have enough information to even be able to speak to any of it, I can't answer your question.
Would you be able to do a similar evaluation such that you could understand whether or not what I am proposing is correct? Would you consider doing that?
Well, I would suggest that is what the 2021 assessments are a reflection of, is the model that's been prepared for last year's assessment.
How about that? Given that the data I provided was correct, would you find that an unusual pattern?
Ms. Blazo, can I just jump in here? I'm certainly willing to let you ask your questions, but I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding, your questions around mass appraisal for other properties, how that relates to the concern you have with your appraisal.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. I'm probably off on a bit of a tangent because I do believe that the model has some inherent biases, and that's why I'm having the issue with my assessment. So I will refocus, and I appreciate your point. So a better question is, of the 3 properties that I've provided on my street, can you please let me know what about those properties make them not comparable? And if you could specifically speak to the property of 613, which has been built by the same builder, so same quality, it's 1,000 square foot larger, it's newer, and is assessed for $100,000 less than my property. Can you explain why that's not a comparable property? It's same builder, same street, same size of the street, bigger.
And just to be helpful here, you're back to your Exhibit C1, page 3?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So which are the two that you're asking me to compare to?
So the properties that I provided that were on my street and that I considered similar are 617 Second Street, 613 Second Street, and 621 Second Street. 617 Second Street, and 613 Second Street, the one I'm referring to, is I think is a comparable property, except for the fact that it's 1,000 square feet bigger. Why is that not considered a comparable property to mine in your assessment? Why?
The 621 or the 617? Sorry, I'm
613.
613.
I mean, all of them for sure, but 613 is pretty straight up, same builder, a little bit newer, bigger, same location.
So we did have this property classified as a two-story with basement. Obviously, it's the CAMA system's way of accounting for, in a lot of these areas, it's a three-story. So, yeah, when we're seeing some of the two stories in South Canmore, some are two stories with basement, some are three stories, because they're all above grade.
So the question is, so is it comparable to my property?
It has an additional floor to yours.
I don't think it does.
It has a third floor. Yeah, it does. I've got,
Okay. And so what in that property drives it to be 100,000 less valuable than my home?
I know for these properties, they were valued separately, the 3 stories or the 2-story and basement with the 2-story no basement. And really, we've got sales of the 2 different types, which are showing we always try to intuit what it means when we see differences in rates per square foot. My gut feel as a valuator would be that people like the 2 versus the additional 3rd story. There's a lot of elevators that are being put into homes in those types of situations. I don't know the exact reason why, but when we did do the valuation of them, they did actually come out based on the sales as deriving different valuations.
Can you define a basement for us so we're all on the same page?
Yeah, so a basement typically would be a below grade area, or a portion of it would be a below grade, so that's even a little corner, on it would be below grade. The way that the houses have been classified in some of the areas in Canmore in the past, the system that they were using didn't accommodate for the 3 stories, so they added a bunch in to get that extra floor space. They added it as a category for a basement. So yes, a basement would typically be below grade. These ones in our comparisons are actually above grade, so they'd be considered a 3-story.
So a 3-story home, 1,000 square foot larger, is built by the same builder, is valued $100,000 less than my property.
I don't have it being 1,000 square feet larger than yours.
Yeah, that's because you called the basement, which is above grade, 700 square feet of the square footage, but it's actually 2,700 square feet of developed space. If that house were to go on the market, it'd be easily $2.5 million.
I can't speculate on what it would go for. I just know that we did not treat them the same. We did have sales of those types of properties which came in with different than the 2-story no basements. You know, at this point, I would just say that they are not 100% comparable, no.
And they're not comparable because they're inferior, or just because they don't fall into one of your subcategories?
No, because they do have an extra floor. We're talking specifically about 613 2nd Street. They do have an extra floor on there. And the sales of those types of properties did not show that they were as valuable as a 2-story no basement. And it is pretty typical if we take away the no basement parts. If you're looking at a bungalow versus a 2-story, bungalows generally are worth more. They cost more to build in the start. They take up more lot size. It is something logical in a real estate environment.
So if let me take that argument forward. So the house that is 2,700 square feet, because it's on 3 stories, which I actually don't think it is, but if it was on 3 stories, the extra 700 square feet is worth negative $100,000 if you compare the two properties.
Ms. Blazo, I'm going to ask you to kind of move on. I think you've asked your question here a couple times. The respondent has given you the answer. We have the data and the evidence on the record. We understand the point you're trying to make. And again, arguing about whether somebody else's assessment is not correct, really we're here to talk about your assessment for your property. So I'd maybe ask you if you could focus your questions.
Then again, I will close. The reason I'm speaking to these examples is I want my assessment to be fair relative to my neighbors. And so that's why that is an important fact for me. And I think I've presented enough information that says those houses could be comparable. And I would like to be compared to those houses as opposed to the ones on First Street.
And that's fair. We take your point, and we believe you have that right to be assessed fairly. So, thank you. Do you have any further questions?
No.
Okay. Thank you so much. Board questions, Ms. Ouellette?
No, thank you. I don't have any questions at this time.
All right.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. So, looking at the building sizes on Respondent's Disclosure R1, page 15, Complainant's Equity Comparables for 613 2nd Street, you've got 1,982 square feet for the building area. And the Complainant's version, page Disclosure C1, page 3, for that same property, 613 2nd Street, shows a square foot total of 2,990. And is the difference what the municipality considers to be a basement area?
The difference is what's coded in our system as being
Pardon?
the difference is what's being coded in our system as basement area. It doesn't mean it's not valuable. It still gets, it still has contributory value to the overall assessment. It's just the way that things had been historically done. So if I were looking at them afresh for future years, I would be calling them 3 stories because they're above grade, and then that square footage, which was part of the basement, would then be added to the overall building net, and then, you know, as you suggested, then the complainant's size would be more on line with mine.
And the same question for 617 Second Street, which on Respondent's disclosure R1, building area shows 1,986 square feet. And on the complainant's disclosure C1, page 3, for 617, shows 2,728 square feet. So the difference is the lower level in both cases.
It's the basement, what we've classified as basement, just being brought up to above grade, which is how realtors typically explain things as well. On MLS, it's above grade versus below grade area, as was suggested as well. So,
And do we know whether those lower levels are in fact above grade?
I did verify that majority of them are.
They are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And
Those are
I
my
mean,
questions.
yeah, and they're used all together. So it's not as problematic as saying, oh, they're classed wrong, they're 2.5 story or 2 story and basement, and these are 3 stories. They've all been classed the same and categorized the same, so that when you go to do the assessments and create the models, it's actually apples for apples, even though they're labeled differently.
Thank you.
Hi, I just have a couple questions. Can you tell us a little bit about South Canmore and the mass appraisal and you know, the models are, how they're kind of changing from year to year? We talked a little bit about at the break that your company's been doing this for 3 years now. Can you give us any evidence that might help Ms. Blazo understand a little bit better?
Okay. I'm just going to, just hopefully I don't seem like I'm on a soapbox or being a crybaby. No, just kidding. So we've been in Canmore, our company's been in Canmore we're just closing out our 3rd year. And so basically we're making changes to a lot of the models as we go on. Specific to South Canmore, one of the things that we discovered early in the game is that the market has increased so much, and the current models that were there were not taking into reflection or taking into account the value of the lots. It's just such, I mean, anybody who goes through South Canmore, I don't think you can find a street where there's not a redevelopment occurring or new construction or homes that are just sitting there waiting to be demoed and rebuilt. So, I mean, it's a really challenging area for sure. I mean, there's other redevelopment areas in Canmore as well, but South Canmore was by far the strongest in this area. So what we've done is we've really looked at increasing some of the value that goes to the land on the property rather than to just separating between improvements. The land in South Canmore is so valuable that you're looking at a property that is going to be demoed, you know, and we're talking like a 1980 home, which isn't really that old, but it's say you take into example a 1980 home, on a 6,600 square foot R1, so it's just single family home, and those properties are selling between, you know, anywhere from 800,000 to 900,000 just for the lot, and then the property's being torn down after. Now, if you add on location, some river, creek kind of access to that, you know, obviously the values go up even from there. So when we're looking at just, you know, we're looking at the assessments, I mean, there's so much of that that's being driven by just location, which is what I would call the land, is just location.
Okay, thank you for that. My next question is, you know, custom, semi-custom, good custom. What do these categories really mean, and how much valuation, or how much, give us a sense of the range on how they would change the value of the improvements across them?
Yeah, and it's not a consistent difference between each one. So this is more where there are parameters for the different qualities of construction. These have been established since, you know, the 70s with the old residential manuals that the, you know, when the Alberta government was doing all the assessments. These were written, they were all cost-based. We're no longer on cost, we do direct sales. However, we still use some of the data that was, you know, relied on in the past. And part of that is obviously the quality of construction, because you can have a 1,000 square foot house, that's a bungalow, say, and it can just be all standard finishes on the inside. So you just have carpeting or lino, laminate kind of flooring, standard cupboards, bathrooms, you know, nothing really special about it. And you have that house, well, it's going to sell for different than if you have a 1,000 square foot house with the vaulted ceilings, windows, you know, packaged through the back, different breaks in the roof lines just to make it more appealing, attractive on the outside instead of just a square box. So that's kind of the background behind why we use the qualities of construction, because it's not just a square footage, it's the quality of materials and the finishes and how elaborate the home is compared to a standard home. So there were, there's 7 quality classifications that we use in the town of Canmore. There were additionally another 3, but they're they're old classifications, but we use 7, and they range anywhere from fair construction, so that's something that you would end up with, you know, a 1960s kind of home that's 700 square feet, bungalow kind of thing. And we range anywhere up to expensive. And that's our highest quality that we have. And those are extremely custom built types of homes. Unique, obviously, for architectural. So they range anywhere from, you know, mansions to a little shack, and that's just trying to help us classify them a little bit better.
Okay.
And so they're, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So we do analyze them separately just to see. So when you asked, you know, is there a range or something specific in between, it really depends on what the market can bear for those types of properties at the time.
And I think maybe the same answer on my next question, but presumably then, like, the custom homes would be compared to custom homes, and semi-custom would be compared to semi-custom in the mass model?
We try to as much as possible. Obviously, when we're doing the valuation, that's how we prepare it. We're looking at, you know, the single groupings. We will look at the whole, you know, the whole range in between, just to make sure that, you know, things kind of are moving the way that you think they would. But yeah, no, definitely we would be looking at those. We would like, ideally, when we're preparing comparables, you know, obviously it would be nice if they were all exactly the same as the subject property. South Canmore properties, there are some, I would suggest, that are very similar to each other, but there's also a lot of really unique properties, especially when you get to, you know, the custom type properties.
Okay. And so maybe a similar question, and in the mass appraisal model, sorry, does it take kind of all the 1 story, the 1.5 story, the 2.5 story, and sort of compare those in each grouping? Is that kind of how the model works, to try and get that homogeneity?
Yeah, we do it both ways, I guess. So we'll go down to the micro for each of the individual groupings, and we'll look at the sales within that group. But we also do look at the overall and how they fit with each other as well.
And my last question is, I think you talked about, you know, sales data kind of drives the model and is the proxy for the unsales, and you said those are actually audited. Can you tell us a little bit about who the audit is and what the audit process is?
Sure. So in order to declare our assessment role, so tax notices can go out and assessment notices can go out, we have to pass a stage 1 audit. And so that's where the provincial government actually looks at all of our valuation, and they break them into different stratifications. And they see if our assessments actually meet the legislative standards as set out in matters relating to assessment and taxation regulation. So that's where I was talking before, the 0.95 to 1.05. Obviously with residential, we have to have a lower COD, which measures the dispersion between that. So what I mentioned before, even if it's below 95% or above 105%, that dispersion measures how much you have and how far away it is from that central point of 1.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Those are the board's questions. We'll now move on to any rebuttal evidence from the complainant. Ms. Blazo, we've taken your rebuttal evidence that was pre-filed and examined that, but do you have any additional new rebuttal evidence you'd like to bring forward?
No, I do not.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to our argument or summation. Ms. Blazo, would you like to make any sort of final comments to the board at this time?
Yes, I would. I just like to try and refocus again. My request is to be compared to comparable houses on my street. I was not satisfied with with the response that I can't be compared to houses on my street because they have basements. And so I'd like that to be reconsidered. They're all above grade. And so I would like to be compared to houses on my street. Secondary, I would choose that you reconsider comparing my house to homes that have also had 50% increases in their taxes, because that could be just a reflection of the same problem. I would like that to be, I would prefer to go beyond that and just be compared to the assessed values of the homes on my street. And finally, I'm probably a bit sorry that I shared so much information on the research I did where I would find things that didn't make sense, but I'm a problem solver, I'm an engineer, I'm retired, and I love data. I downloaded all the data and I mapped it and pivoted it so many ways just to try and understand, because I really care about this process. No need to consider that at all. Just look at my house, look at the houses on my block. I request humbly, do not compare me to the houses on First Street that back onto green space. If you look very closely at those locations, I've been in them. They have beautiful unobstructed views of the mountains. They're on the very, very edge. You can't see any parking lot from maybe except one of them. So if you walk, take a walk down the street, I request walk down the street, look at my house, look at the ones that I'm providing as comparables, and just give it a good thought. And I appreciate your time.
Great, thank you so much for those submissions. Any final arguments, summations from the respondent?
Yeah, I really do want to highlight that, assessments are prepared on an annual basis. So looking at percent changes year over year for different properties, it doesn't really impact the assessment process, although frustrating or confusing, I can appreciate. It isn't how we're required according to the MGA and according to the regulations to prepare assessments. It is the position of the assessor that the sales and equity comparables that we've provided are more comparable to the subject property than those of the complainant. We've shown the reasons why. There's been lots of properties that have been brought forward that we've tried to kind of streamline and show, the ones that are the most comparable. The most significant comparable to the subject property is, of course, the sale of the subject property itself, which sold on October 2nd, 2020, like I said, approximately 9 months before the valuation date of July 1st, 2021, for $1,640,000. which is the same within a couple $1,000s of the assessed value. So because of the comparables that we've provided, and because of the sale of the subject property as well, which supports our assessment, and is actually, when it's adjusted to July 1st, below the assessed value, the assessor requests that the 2021 assessment for this property be confirmed at $1,642,000. Thank you.
You're welcome. And Ms. Blazo, you get the last word. Anything further you'd like to provide us with?
I think I'll just reflect on that last statement in terms of the fact that my house sold for that amount is good evidence in order to prove that that should be the assessed value. If you go through the standards of mass appraisal, the one thing you are meant not to consider when doing an assessment is the value that that house sold for. What you need to consider is the value of the houses that have assessed in that grouping to influence the model. And so I just want to state that for the fact that that is a well, I guess, in my opinion, from what I've read, that's not a good piece of evidence, and I hope you would consider that as well.
Great. Thank you so much. So I would like to thank everyone for your cooperation and your helpfulness. Those were some great presentations and some good information provided to us. So at this time, I would like to ask the parties if they feel they have been heard today and if they feel they've received a fair hearing. Complainant?
Yeah, I think I've been heard. I don't know if it's how it's going to work out, but yeah, I think I've been heard.
Okay, great. And respondent? Thank you. So I now will declare this hearing closed. No further evidence or submissions may be received by the board. The Municipal Government Act requires a written decision within 30 days and gives the clerk an additional 7 days to issue the decision. We will make every effort to meet or beat those requirements, and the clerk will forward our decision to you at her earliest opportunity. I think now we'll close this hearing and then maybe close the live stream as well, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to this Canmore Local Assessment Review Board hearing. I would like to remind everyone that the Assessment Review Board hearings are open to the public and this hearing will be recorded and streamed live. The video recording will be the record for this hearing. We are here today to review the complaint and subsequent evidence as filed for Tax Rule 16375, which is the municipal address of 706 First Street in Canmore. I will start by introducing the panel and ask the parties to introduce themselves. After that, I will explain our standard hearing procedure. My name is Dale Hildebrand. I am the presiding officer appointed to this panel. The other panel members with me today are Ms. Michelle Ouellette and Mr. William Fodden. Does anyone have an objection to the panel as constituted? Respondent, thank you. I'm now going to have the parties introduce themselves, starting with the respondent. Could you please give us your, state your name for the record, organization, and your position within the municipality.
My name is Deanne Bannerman. I'm with Benchmark Assessment Consultants, and I am the assessor for the town of Canmore.
Great, thank you. Considering that the complainant is not here today, our standard process would be that we'll have the respondent present their evidence, followed by questions from the panel. And then we'll give the respondent an opportunity for final argument and summation. So given that the respondent or the complainant is not here today, does anyone have any issues or concerns with this process? Yeah, and that's my next one here. Preliminary issues from the respondent, please.
It has met onus under Section 469 of the Municipal Government Act and demonstrated how the assessment for their property is incorrect. I don't believe that the complainant has met the evidentiary burden of proof under Section 469 of the Municipal Government Act and demonstrated how the assessment is incorrect. And I'm asking for the complaint to be dismissed under the authority of Section 467(2) for non-compliance with Section 469 of the MGA. So the complainant had a duty to disclose documentary evidence and any written argument by September 6, 2022, as provided in pages 36 to 39 of my submission. The notice of hearing was sent on July 19th, 2022, and outlined the disclosure responsibilities. The complainant was required to provide disclosure to the Assessment Review Board clerk and the opposing party, Benchmark Assessment Consultants, Inc. The complainant failed to provide any evidence or argument on or before the required date to either party. Matters relating to assessment complaints regulation is clear that the board must not hear any evidence that's not disclosed within the legislative timelines. The Alberta Court of Queen's Bench and assessment review boards have held that late evidence is inadmissible. And the onus of proof to prove that an assessment is incorrect is the responsibility of the complainant. This principle has been well established by the Court of Queen's Bench and adopted by several assessment review boards. I've listed the cases below on page 6. I've also gone further to state that an increase in assessment from a previous year or a difference in increase from a previous year from a different property isn't grounds enough to demonstrate that an assessment is incorrect. And again, there's been decisions on that on page 7. So boards have dismissed complaints where the complainant has failed to disclose documentary evidence. I've listed 3 decisions on page 8 that support this. And in addition to bearing the onus to prove that the assessment is incorrect, the complainant also bears the burden of proof to demonstrate that the requested value is correct. In this case, if you look at page 40 of the complaint form is there, they have not provided a requested value for the assessment.
I'm sorry, I missed that last. It was page 40?
Page 40, yeah, is the complaint form that was initially submitted by the complainant to the ARB, and there is no requested assessment of amount listed.
It's page 40 of your...
Sorry, of mine, yes.
Thank you, yes.
Yeah, and the complainant has a multi-step requirement to demonstrate to the board a change in the assessment is necessary. First, the complainant must show that the assessment is incorrect, and second, convincingly prove that the requested value is correct. In the absence of both, the boards have decided can decide that a change to the assessment is unwarranted. And again, we have, I have some board decisions to support that statement as well. So in this particular case, we have not received disclosure. There's limited information on the complaint form itself to provide any kind of evidence or argument that any change in the assessment is warranted, and I'd ask that the board dismiss the complaint.
All right, thank you very much for bringing that forward. The panel would like to take a short break now to consider this request. So the panel has before it a request to dismiss based on the complaint not meeting the requirements as set out in the legislation. I'll now provide the panel's ruling. We are granting this request. We believe that the complaint has not met the onus required in terms of the MGA under sections 416, 469, 467. And therefore, we will close this hearing, and we will be providing our written decision within 30 days as required by the Municipal Government Act, and allow an additional 7 days for the clerk to issue the decision. And with that, I close this hearing and thank everybody for their participation.